Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Raihan Nandini, and today I would like to present my research proposal entitled Linguistic Prestige in Digital Discourse Perceived Credibility of English Language Opinions on Social Media. This presentation, I will explain the background of the study, the research problems, objectives, theoretical framework, methodology, and the expected findings of my research. Let me begin with the background of the study. Nowadays, social media has become an important part of our daily lives. We use platforms such as Instagram, TikTok, X, and Facebook, not only for entertainment, but also to share opinions, news, and information. However, when people read information on social media, they do not always judge it, only based on the content. Sometimes, they are also influenced by the language that is used. English is often associated with intelligence, education, professionalism, and even higher social status. Because of this perception, people may assume that opinions written in English are more trustworthy than similar opinions written in Indonesian. Even when both express exactly the same idea, although this phenomenon is very common, especially among Indonesian social media users, there are still very few studies that specifically examine how English influences people's perception of credibility. Therefore, this research aims to investigate whether linguistic prestige affect how people evaluate opinions on social media. Next is research problem. Based on that background, I formulated three research questions. The first question is whether the use of English influences user perception of credibility on social media. The second question examines whether linguistic prestige affect people's judgments of trustworthiness and expertise. Finally, the third question investigates the relationship between linguistic prestige and perceived credibility in digital discourse. This question will help determine whether language choice alone can influence people's evaluation of online information. Next is research objective. The objective of this study corresponds directly to the research question. First, I want to investigate whether opinions written in English are perceived as more credible than opinions written in Indonesian. Second, I aim to examine whether linguistic prestige influences people's judgments regarding trustworthiness and expertise. Lastly, I want to analyze the relationship between linguistic prestige and perceived credibility in digital discourse. By achieving these objectives, I hope this research can provide a better understanding of how language affects people's perceptions in online communication. Next is this slide presents several previous studies related to my research. The first study found that Indonesian youth generally have positive attitudes toward English and associated with prestige and global communication. The second study reported that English plays an important role in the internationalization of Indonesian higher education, reflecting its prestigious status. And another study showed that university students believe English provides academic and career advantages. There was also research indicating that social media helps improve English learning by increasing motivation and language exposure. Finally, another study found that English frequently appears in TikTok interactions, demonstrating its influence in digital communication. Although these studies discuss English prestige and language attitudes, most of them focus on education or language learning. Very few studies especially investigate whether English affects people's perception of credibility on social media. This research attempts to fill that gap. This research has three main contributions. The first is the theoretical contribution. This study explains knowledge in social linguistics, especially regarding linguistic prestige and digital communication. Second is the practical contribution. The findings may encourage social media users to evaluate online information more critically, rather than assuming that English language content is automatically more reliable. Finally, the academic contribution. This research can serve as a useful reference for future researchers who are interested in language attitudes, credibility, and digital discourse. Next is theoretical background. This research is supported by four main theories. The first is linguistic prestige. This theory explains that some languages have higher social value than others. English, for example, is often associated with intelligence, professionalism, education, and higher social status. The second theory is language ideology. It explains that people's beliefs and attitude toward a language influence how they judge the speakers or writers of that language. The third theory is search credibility theory. According to this theory, people evaluate information mainly based on two dimensions, trustworthiness and expertise. The final concept is digital discourse. In online communication, language is not only a communication tool, but also a signal of identity, authority, and credibility. These theories together explain why English language opinions may receive more positive evaluation than Indonesian language opinions. Next is conceptual framework. This slide illustrates the conceptual framework of my research. The independent variable is the use of English language opinions on social media. Then linguistic prestige and language ideology explain how people interpret the language they encounter. Finally, the dependent variable is perceived credibility. In other words, the study assumes in other words, the study assumed that the language used in a social media post can influence how credible people think that post is. Next, the study used a quantitative research approach because the data will be collected in numerical and analyzed statistically. And the research design is descriptive comparative because it compares participants' credibility judgments toward English and Indonesian social media posts. The participants are university students who actively use social media. And the sampling technique is purposive sampling, meaning that participants are selected based on specific criteria relevant to the study. Next is research instrument. The main instrument used in this study is a questionnaire. Participants will first read two versions of the same social media opinion. One version will be written in English, and while the other will be written in Indonesian. After reading each version, participants will evaluate the post based on four aspects: trustworthiness, expertise, reliability, and believability. The response will be measured using a 5-point Likert scale ranging from strongly disagree to strongly agree. Using the same content in two different languages allows the study to isolate the effect of language choice on credibility judgments. Next is the data collection. Process consists of several steps. First, prepare the questionnaire and research materials. Second, select participants who meet the research criteria. Third, the questionnaire will be distributed. Participants will read both the English and Indonesian version of the social media posts. Then they will evaluate the credibility of each post. Finally, all responses will be collected and analyzed statically to answer the research question. After collecting the data, I will analyze them using descriptive and inferential statistics. Descriptive statistics will summarize participants' response by calculating the frequency, percentage, mean, and standard deviation. To compare the credibility ratings between English and Indonesian posts, I will use a paired sample t-test. The significance level will be 0.05. The statistical analysis will show whether the differences between the two language conditions are statistically significant or simply occur by change. Finally, these are the expected findings of this research. I expect that opinions written in English will generally receive higher credibility ratings than those written in Indonesian. I also expect that linguistic prestige will significantly influence people's perception of trustworthiness and expertise. Overall, this study may demonstrate that language choice function as an important cue when people evaluate information on social media, even when the actual content is the same. These are the main references that support this research. They include studies on linguistic prestige, search credibility, language ideology, and digital communication. These references provide both the theoretical foundation and empirical evidence for this study. That brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for attention.